Hi, friends. Susan Blackwell from the Spark File here to let you know that the doors are open for the Spark File Illume, a 9-month group creativity coaching mastermind that invites you to be the Chief Creative Officer and Chief Marketing Officer of your creativity. But what does that mean? That means in 9 months in Illume, you will clarify and advance your big creative goals and learn how to effectively share your work with the world. Now, if you're listening to this and you're an experienced creative or an accomplished professional who seeks a space where it is safe to attempt something you've never tried before, or complete a big creative project, or take your work to the next level and acquire the skills needed to share your creative work with the world, Illume might be right for you. We are calling in emotionally intelligent, high-functioning creatives who are ready to level up. You can find out more by going to thesparkfile.com/Illume, but do it now to find out if Illume is right for you and to save with early bird discounts. That's thesparkfile.com/Illume. Take a leap, take a risk. Go to thesparkfile.com/Illume and join us for Illume.
The Sparkfile podcast may contain profanity and other adult content.
Please use your discretion.
When I bump into something that inspires me, I dump it in my spark file. Could be something that I want to make or how I want to be. I pump it in my spark file. I jump into my spark file. Let's open up the spark file.
Welcome to the Spark File, your one-stop instrument case for creative inspiration.
I'm Laura Camion.
And I'm Susan Blackwell. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. You may be asking yourself, what exactly is a Spark File? Where do I get one? What do I file in it? These are good questions, y'all. We've got answers.
That's right. A Spark File is the place where you consistently collect all your inspirations and fascinations. And if you're like us and you're making stuff all the time, you already know that sometimes the wellspring of inspiration can run a little dry. We're here to refill it.
So we're on the lookout for fresh ideas, images, and inspiration that spark our creativity and pique our curiosity, things that inspire us to get up off of our asses and make things like this podcast.
Or a super creative lesson plan to wake up and shake up your students.
Or a song that integrates cello, live sound looping, and improvisation.
Or a piece of music that weaves your tears into a song. On today's Makersode, we're going to talk to someone who truly sparks us.
And that special someone is Okorie OKCello Johnson. Okorie, welcome to The Spark File.
Wow. Thank you so much. That is the most wonderfully elegant and kind of composed intro I've ever had on a podcast or an interview.
I love that you're saying that. And I love that when we put out an episode that's just like the blooper reel, we're going to include me just like shitting the bed on that intro.
With your name.
Well, it broke the ice. So we're nice and we're comfortable now. We're good.
Okorie, before we get started, you know the drill. It's the Spark File price of admission. Real quick, you have to tell us a creative risk you've recently taken.
Yesterday was a big creative risk. I had an opportunity to take my song Liminal and to put it in conversation with the idea of liminal space in front of 1,500 people, in which I explored the failure which gave birth to the career that I have right now. It's something I've done in other spaces, but this is the first time where I was really reckoning with the fact that while that moment brought me into the space, I'm not actually out of it. And that's a complicated but important admission if you're going to get up in front of 1,500 people and be vulnerable in that way. So that was certainly a moment yesterday. And I guess I should say it was at the Story 19 conference here in
So
Nashville.
we're at the Story Gathering in Nashville, Tennessee.
And the theme is liminal space, which is why that was so appropriate.
Okorie, will you please explain for folks who may not know, what is liminal space?
So liminal space, what is the language? Between no longer and not yet, or something to that effect. The idea is that it is the space of transition when you have not yet become what you are becoming, but you are no longer what you once were.
So what you're saying to me is when you were sharing that piece, which I've told you, Cami, and I'm telling you now, it it blew my butt off my body. I had to go to the emergency room, and surgeons were like, "There's nothing we can do."
Yeah,
It sounds painful. I was hoping it wasn't painful.
Okorie, it was
could have felt it here.
so spectacular.
Oh wow, thank you.
It was good. We'll talk more about it in a second. But you're telling me that you were this is really remarkable. You were sharing a story yesterday with music, and you were telling the story about being in liminal space, and you feel like you're still in liminal space.
Well, in addition to just understanding that I'm still in liminal space, it's interesting that these invitations to tell your story actually help you to realize your story, because sometimes you're reflective, sometimes you're aware of kind of what you're going through, but sometimes until someone asks you a question, you haven't really given it that thought.
It's like a prompt from the universe. Yeah,
it is. And so what's interesting is that, so some good things have been happening for me in my career and in my kind of identity as an artist. But I'm still very much stuck in those places, making decisions, unsure of what it is I'm becoming, and unsure in some ways of the kind of consequences that becoming comes with. All of which are, I think, I'm struggling to kind of see more so as necessary than good or bad. But that requires some letting go, some bravery. I'm speaking really in code here.
No, I love this.
You're super mysterious, but I feel like we're going to get there.
We're going to get there.
And I think one of the most important things that I heard you say is that you're still creating within this space.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And so many people, like, we try to point these moments out for anyone listening. If you're waiting for everything to line up correctly, or if you're waiting to have already become the person you think you're becoming in order to start creating, get a move on. Do it now. Do it while you're in this
and
space.
The creativity, the things you're making could be the boat that transports you down the river to
Well, and I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, because I absolutely revere this person, and this person has passed. But I think for me, like, I'm a huge Prince fan, massive Prince fan.
Yeah.
And I so identify with the body of work that resonated with his questions rather than the body of work that resonated with his answers.
Say more about that.
And so I think in some ways, the really powerful art, the art that connects with people, connects with the questions that they're answering. For your own sanity and for the quality of your life, sometimes there are some questions that you need to answer. And that may be very, very, very good for you. I'm not always sure it's the best thing for art.
Will you say more about that?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm on the edge of understanding this, but I'm not there yet.
I think that some of the most beautiful art comes from negotiating the uncertainty of a life.
Yeah.
I got it. You got the spark into my head.
And I think that uncertainty is the energy. Right? It is the energy, and it's the way that you're harnessing and or managing that energy as a creative. Hopefully that is moving you and therefore other people. But sometimes I think that if you answer that question, you solve that problem, there's a possibility that you could also get rid of that tension.
That's right.
You get rid of that energy.
That's right.
And while you could be the same brilliant creator, something may not be in the art the way that it was before.
You need a new question.
Yeah. Right? And so I'll be honest with you, my personal life and my person, I like certainty. I like comfort. You know what I mean?
Feel that. Yeah.
And with words, I'm generally pretty comfortable. And I don't think I'm dishonest, but I do think that I can talk about difficult things in composed ways. Right?
Yeah.
When I'm behind my cello, I don't quite have that same control, and I definitely don't have the same kind of composure.
That's rocking like talking, though.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
It is great.
Yeah.
It is absolutely great, and it's a safe space in some ways to be that kind of vulnerable, right? But it's a vulnerability nonetheless, right? And so I generally know I have something I want to share with the world when I'm in my living room and like exploring, and I start bawling. Like, so that's what happened at the beginning of that story. I was, I sat down on my 40th birthday. I came up with this bass line. This bass line made me cry. I improvised over the bass line. The improvisation made me cry. I spent the next 2 weeks kind of like in some weepy state trying to figure out what that song was going to be. And then I arrived at something, and I knew I had something to share. But that's pretty much the process for me. The process is living room, exploring, playing, perhaps not aware of something I'm feeling. And then the cello captures something articulately. And I'm like, oh gosh, man.
I got sparks on sparks on sparks stacking up here.
Would this be a moment, though, for our listeners just to ask you this question for people who don't know you?
Oh, yes, you're admitted into the Spark File. In case you didn't know, you're in.
Oh,
you're
gotcha.
in. You're in. Yeah.
But for people who don't know you, how do you identify creatively? You've spoken about your cello, but can you tell us?
So I am a cellist, composer, storyteller. I am a looper. And
that means you travel through time.
Through time.
Like I saw that Bruce Willis movie.
Completely. I do travel through time. It means I use a little...
Have you been sent to assassinate yourself?
I haven't yet. But who knows what a future mission will include.
Right. The sequel.
I use a little electronic box that allows me to record myself live.
Oh, yeah.
And then to play over top of what I've recorded to create an ensemble of cello.
Yes.
Over which I will then add a melody and improvise melodically. That's an important part of what I do. The three elements I would say are looping, improvising, storytelling. And I use the cello to do that. And I would say if you were going to locate my music, if you were going to locate my sound, it's at the intersection of classical and jazz, but that travels. So that intersection moves through maybe funk, or maybe there's some things that are like reggae, and there's some things that are definitely classical, and some things that are soul. But it's definitely a mix of African diasporic forms and inspirations and stories, and a very European instrument, a very ancient phenomenon, right? The cello, and really current technology, and this idea of narrative without words. Those are the things that I'm committing to when I'm trying to create.
And what drew you to the cello as the instrument to
what's
deliver
the origin story?
So I'm still evolving on the telling of the story, right? So I think maybe I'm realizing I was chosen by the cello. I didn't choose the cello. But the real story is that there's this wonderful organization in DC called the DC Youth Orchestra. And they had classes for every single instrument in the orchestra. And the only one that had space was the cello.
So
there
you go. A practicality.
Right. I'm really practical. I mean, there were some other conditions. For instance, violin was full. Everyone wants to play the violin. I was an especially I was a slower developing 6-year-old, 7-year-old. So I didn't have my 2 front teeth, which is a little atypical. So that means I couldn't do.
See a picture.
Yeah, or maybe not. Which means I couldn't do brass or woodwinds.
Oh,
yeah, you need your 2 front
because
teeth.
you need your 2 front teeth.
Yeah, you'd have your 2 front teeth. You know the whole song. I could whistle like literally.
This is the cutest story that's ever been on the Spark File podcast.
And so the other instruments are percussion. My mother's sanity would not abide that.
Yeah.
And then I was too tiny for the bass or the basses that they had. So the 2 instruments were viola and cello. My mother played the viola a little bit when she was younger. She said, try something different.
Yeah.
And I was a highly compliant child. It's like, sure,
I'll do that.
there it is.
But at some point, so it sounds like in your description, you alluded to a bit of tension between the stories you want to tell and the old European instrument that you tell them with. I'm just wondering, like, when did you embrace that tension? When did that become sort of intentional?
Well, it's interesting. I was pretty good at the cello as a kid, and I had a teacher, several teachers who were really investing in me, and they wanted me to go to conservatory. They wanted me to go to music school. I didn't want to go to music school, not because I didn't like music, not because I didn't like classical music, but because I had good friends in the orchestra. Good friends. We got along on certain things, but we could only really talk about classical music, how much we were practicing, how much we loved or hated our teachers, things that were very specific to that. I liked sports.
Yeah.
I liked go-go, which is a kind of music in DC. I liked...
you alluded to that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what go-go is.
Man. Can someone hold the mic so I can demonstrate this?
Gotcha.
You just sit right here. So
Gotcha.
it's like an Afro-Cuban rhythm on which horns and kind of jazz instrumentation kind of originally were placed.
So
it was
excited
started by
about
this guy
whatever
named,
you're about to do.
This is
It was
awesome.
started by this guy named Chuck Brown in the 70s
Okay.
as a way of creating opportunities for live bands to compete with DJs, because DJs could spin continuously and live bands played a song, they stopped, they played a song, they stopped. People were less interested in that. So Chuck Brown was like, we're going to create a band art form that continues the way that DJs do. And I'm going to pick and choose these elements.
Sparks.
And this is the you know, you're going to hear it on the table, but here we go. So
That is the shit.
Woo!
anyway, so that is that's like a DC phenomenon, right? Like that
Go-go.
beat and all that swirls around
Yeah.
it, you know. But what's interesting is that it is pretty much exclusive to DC, a few places in Maryland, maybe Philadelphia, and some places in North Carolina. And outside of that part of the country, you don't hear go-go. The only time you may have heard it was when Spike Lee did Doing the Right Thing, and there was a dance break in the middle. There was like a pool party, and they had the song Doing the Butt. Is
that go-go?
That's go-go. That's a somewhat
never
very
knew that.
commercial version
Doing
of
the
go-go.
butt is
Yeah.
Doing the
go-go.
bug. Yes,
You
Doing
learn
the butt is
something
go-go.
every
There it
day.
is. Anyway, so that is very clearly not classical music.
Right.
and
your friends in the
not what
orchestra,
my friends
yeah.
were and the orchestra were. So I struggled finding the fullness of my identity in the very kind of what seemed to be at the time narrow classical world.
Yeah.
And so I knew that I couldn't spend 4 years of my life narrowing myself in that way.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got to Morehouse, which is a historically black college in Atlanta, where I was playing in the orchestra for non-majors, not seriously, because nobody really was that serious about it. I came back from rehearsal, had my cello on my back, and I saw, again, I need to emphasize the fact that I went to a historically black college.
Yeah.
Right? In case anyone know, I'm a black man in my 40s, right? So that this is going to be important to the story. There's
Yeah.
a guy standing on his balcony from his dorm room in a black skull cap with dreadlocks, wearing plaid, black jeans, black boots, a wallet that has a chain on it, with a guitar in his hand, playing Stone Temple Pilots plush, which is amazingly rare at a school like Morehouse. But it's also, I love Stone Temple Pilots. I loved kind of like the grunge. I loved everything.
When you
I loved
saw
the
the
go-go.
band playing, were you like,
yeah,
He's my people.
But I also thought, like, I'm not really going to bother him because he's playing. So I went and I sat outside of his door and listened.
And waited.
Which is kind of weird. Like,
Just
it's
like
one of those
like a light stalking?
light stalking. And he walked out and saw me lightly stalking him. And was like, why are you sitting outside my door? And I didn't have a good reason for him, but I said, yeah, you were playing music. I really enjoyed it. Is it okay if I sit? And he's like, no, not really. No, you can't sit outside my door, but I do see your cello. You can come in and you can play with me. And I'm like, yeah, so that's the thing. It's a cello. Not really much of an opportunity to do that. He said, whatever, man, just figure it out. And that kind of dismissal
Yeah.
is
gift.
pretty much the doorway through which I walked into my entire adult life. So about a year later, I'm not only a year later, about an hour later, I had a part to the song that he was playing, Plush. About 3 hours later, I had two parts to two of his original songs. About a week later, we had a band.
Who is this
about
magical
this guy.
person?
This is named Julian Tillery, one of my best friends to this day.
Julian
Julian Tillery.
Julian
Yes.
Tillery.
Thank you, Julian.
Yes.
There's a spark.
There's a spark. So while we were playing like rock, right?
Yeah.
From there, I ended up running into a very young India Simpson who would be known to the world as India R.E. So we ended up playing together for a while. And then from there, I ran into another woman named Doria Roberts, who had also really kind of a big folk career that I ended up playing with her. And so all of a sudden, right around that time, I would say 93, 94 through 2000,
Yeah.
I began discovering how to apply the cello to art forms that resonated with me and to communities in which I saw myself.
Love
That's
this.
incredible.
Yeah.
I
So
can't tell you
that
how
was
much
the
I
story.
love this.
I also think, like, again, I just want to like point out for our listeners, because I think it's so amazing when people do something that they feel strongly about, that they don't necessarily have a picture of someone else having done it before.
A model.
They're like, you couldn't look around and be like, I want to be like that guy who's doing
models.
that.
You know, there was one cello in our ether at the time that you've seen. it was Oasis's Wonderwall. You remember that?
Yes.
So you didn't see the cellist, but you saw the like dismembered cello. You saw the bow. You know what I mean? And there was that one cello line. That's not really enough to kind of pattern a career after.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So there was a lot of failure. There was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of people being really generous and nice and saying, "Hey, come play with us," and then you having no idea how to like interface, and they're like, "Oh, that's okay," and like figuring it out and saying, "Well, try this, or that's too busy, or play low, or play like a bass here, or can you play like a saxophone here?" And I'm like, "I guess." And so from maybe 19 or 20 on, there have been these like, "Hey, we're just going to kick you into this deep end of the pool." And
It's interesting though, because it reminds me of when I was talking with Leslie Odom recently. He was explaining how by writing his book, he found his writing voice. And I feel like it's a similar thing. By making this work, you found your voice.
Completely. Well, I found a voice for sure.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say I found my solo voice until much, much later. I found a voice that allowed me to integrate both my musical sensibility and the limitations or the strengths of the cello into contemporary space, which there was no model for me at the time.
You are paving roads.
That's right.
Right.
That's
Trying, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know that I would have identified what I was doing as particularly personal at this point.
Got it.
Right. I'm a
Got
cellist,
it.
kind of for hire.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
you bring
Yeah.
me, I may have a flavor, right? You know, Okorie has a thing
Yeah.
that he does, right? But I'm adding to your project. It wasn't until that story I told yesterday when I was 40 that I began to really not just explore or understand, but need to connect the cello to my own very personal expression. And it wasn't, to be honest with you, for public consumption. It was because like I was kind of imploding. Like I was dealing with a whole lot of shame.
The self-expression.
Self-expression. So some of the context, I was trying to produce a film. I left the classroom. I was at a prep school in Atlanta teaching comfortably and successfully, and said, "Hey, I'm going to go make a film." There's more to the story than that, but essentially there's that. And I took a big risk. And while I didn't crash and burn, which actually might have been easier, I really started to just like fizzle out. Like people like, "Oh yeah, you're a smart guy. You're a good writer." But no, I'm not really interested in this project. Write something more tantalizing, more scandalous, more, And at this point, I'm trying some other media projects, and they're really mediocre. And my wife was really supportive at one point, and she's not supportive at this point, but she's like, I don't think you really know what you're doing right now. So until you figure that out.
Talk about liminal. This is the liminal
That's it.
space.
That's
right.
absolutely it.
This is you in a room, the lights are cut off, and you're patting the walls looking for the light switch.
Completely. And what's interesting, and so here's the 1980 John Hughes movie part of this, right? The cello has been on my shoulder, perhaps as the impractical, not sexy friend for all of my life. Right?
Does the cello get a makeover in this story?
Probably should, but like
The cello takes off her glasses.
you know what I mean? Like, and then all of a sudden at 40, I'm like, oh, it's you. It's always been you, right?
Right.
So that's what it was, because I was trying to tell these stories.
Yes.
I was trying to learn this production language, which, I was doing better at. I was getting it, but I didn't speak it effectively or eloquently.
Unlike this instrument that you've been playing since you were...
that I've put down, half a dozen times,
Yeah.
that have pretty much provided entrance into all kinds of worlds.
Yeah.
Most specifically, the most important relationships, my wife, my best friend.
Is that right?
All the things that are important to me in Atlanta. Like, I don't really get to walk into those rooms without the cello. And it took me until 40 to be like, oh, wait a minute, I should be using you to tell my story.
Together,
we should be,
cello,
right?
You and I.
So can we talk about this story?
Yeah.
For the people that couldn't be at Story in Nashville, Tennessee. I know that you sort of gave us the bullet points earlier, but will you tell us this story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I did set the context of that things were starting to look like I needed to make a different decision. And I woke up on the morning of my 40th birthday, and I sat down at my cello. And usually I would tune, or I would, maybe I would improvise. But this morning I didn't even really improvise, because just coming up with a bass line isn't quite the way that I improvise. But I sat down on my instrument. It was already hooked up to a looper from the night before when I was practicing. And there's this bass line that kind of poured out. Dum, da-dum, dum, 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 dum. The song there's on my album somewhere, so it's much better than my humming it. And so I sat there, and I'm not going to say I recall what I was thinking, but I recall what I was feeling, and I was starting to well up, and I was really starting to kind of get uncomfortable with whatever it was expressing, because I think it was like dead on, maybe, like it was really close to what I was feeling. It was very close to what I was experiencing. And so I decided to improvise over it. And so I spent a good 15, 20 minutes improvising over it. And all through the improvisation, I'm like crying and heaving and like not actually coming up with like the most composed or graceful improvisations, because I'm literally having an emotional reaction right now. And I finish, and I kind of like wake up, and the top rim of my shirt is actually like soaked. Like I'm not exaggerating. I'm really like bawling at this point. And I'm like, in the wake of this experience, I'm like, okay, so there's something very real there, something very important that I need to kind of pay attention to. So I didn't know that I was writing a song at that very moment, as much as for the next 2 weeks, I created as many opportunities as I could to improvise over that bass line. So I just was like, okay, I need to, what is it saying? I felt like maybe the bass line was a question, maybe the improvisations could be an answer. And I stumbled onto this melody, and the melody made sense. And the melody was reminiscent of how I imagined jazz sounding. It was reminiscent of soundtracks. It was reminiscent of like really, really simple, sparse, but eloquent poetry. I was like, okay, this is all the stuff that I like. This is all the stuff that's important to me. This is all of who I am. And it's in a package that I understand, that I know. And so I pretty much finished that song. And then all of a sudden, kind of like a faucet was turned on. I was like, all right, so here's another song. Let's figure out how to do that. Take this process, take this looping thing. Let's work out bass lines. Let's work out interior parts. Let's work out melodies. And let's connect it to emotion or to a narrative or to a story. And it ended up pretty much creating about 8 songs, right? So I ended up having about 8 songs that I could perform. And I put those songs in a concert. And that concert was free, and the first concert was just my friends and family who had come to see me play with established artists elsewhere, right? Sure. But never come to see me play by myself. And my wife at the time was a fundraiser for a dance company, so that we had access to the space. And I just put on a concert, and
this is how things get done.
Yeah.
This is how things get done.
It was long. It was way long. It was almost 2 hours. It shouldn't have been. I talked way more than I should have.
Wait, so you told stories?
Yeah, I did. I mean, it was really me testing out this concept, right?
Yes.
And people were really generous. There were many more covers, right? So like, I figured I needed to fill the time, right? I needed to play covers, right? And I realized that over time that really wasn't my strength. But the first 2 shows were for free, and I handed out a survey afterwards.
Oh.
Yeah, tell me what your experience was.
So smart.
Yeah, tell me. That's probably my wife's. Like collaboratively, we put a lot of effort into and then so we kind of read the feedback. Some things are really resonating. We like this. We don't like this. I put my 3rd concert up, and then that was a paid gig at a venue where people perform. And then at that point, I was committed to doing one a month, because the first one was in January.
Wow.
So I ended up doing one a month. It also turned out that I was playing with a band at the time that also was seeing this, and they're like, hey, well, you should come with us to London. And so we went to England. So we toured and played England a little bit. I had 4 days down. And I was like, I'm going to play my Epiphany show here in London somewhere. And so I walked around with my cello on my back and like was just knocking around and poking my way into like clubs. I ended up bouncing into the Ritzy upstairs in Brixton in London. It's like, hey, I mean, I'd like to put on a show here. You got any nights that are open? They're like, I guess, sure. Come on, make it happen. So I got online, started like connecting with people I knew in London, promoted it, did a show in London. And then I'm doing a show in DC where I'm from. And then by the end of that year, I had done 12 Epiphany shows. And so the name of the show for me was EPI.PHONY, playing on the whole idea of like a sound realization, right?
Yeah.
So Epiphany, right? And
That's
so
good.
by that December, I had really realized quite a few things. I'd realized a lot about myself as an artist, a lot about this thing that I was developing, a lot about the potential for the cello to communicate something different to people other than like the Bach unaccompanied suites, right? When people think of solo cello, they think of Yo-Yo Ma playing the suites, which is beautiful, but that's not everybody's cup of tea. And more important, it was this real kind of parting of the clouds and this kind of ray of sunshine and this horizon, like, okay, and a direction. And my life radically changed from that moment forward. It didn't change in like, some record producer came down and said, hey, we're going to make you, super rich and famous overnight. But what it did was it gave me a developing competence and a narration and an art form that was uniquely mine.
That
And
is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And the thing that moved me so much yesterday as I was watching you play, and what you're doing is complex. The looping makes it more complex. A lifetime of experience working with this instrument. The storytelling that's running through it, the singing of the cello. I mean, it was sparks stacked on sparks, stacked on sparks.
Thank you.
And it was all sparked by you being in this 40-year-old transitional space and a feeling rising up in you. Maybe the catalyst was the sound of that recurring theme, that figure, that musical figure that you developed. And then just the collar of your shirt soaked becomes a song, becomes a concert, becomes a concert series, becomes your voice, becomes a compass for your professional and creative self-expression.
Yeah.
I don't even have any more words. Like it really, this is why the surgeons apologized and shook their head and said, "We cannot reattach your butt, Ms. Blackwell."
We cannot. I was like,
do I need insurance for that? That sounds like liability to me.
My lawyers will be in touch.
Lawyers will be in just a matter of time. I heard another word in that story that I want to highlight because we talk about this in our workshop. I heard you say, by that time, I was committed to doing one concert a month.
Yes.
Who did you make that commitment to?
It was definitely to me. And I'm not 100% sure that I had any kind of, I don't know that it was about discipline. I don't know that it was about developing a concept. I don't know that I was nearly that present. But I do know that it was an opportunity to figure something out that was so important to me. It was, what are these songs saying to me? What questions are they asking? What am I answering by performing them? What kind of experience am I creating for an audience, and why would they come back? Why would they come back to see me 12 times in a year? Because I'm not traveling to different cities, right?
Right.
And many people stayed with me from like the third show all the way through. So
amazing.
There were all these questions that I felt not only did I have like a real serious interest in answering, but there are two things that I think are very specific to creatives that I hold in high esteem. They're kind of ethics for me. One is honesty, right? And I think sometimes what's interesting about artists is that we listen to voices that other people don't, not because those voices are easy to listen to, but because there's a certain kind of honesty. Like, well, this is how I'm aligned right now, and I've got to honor that.
This is the truth.
So
now I got to hear it.
But then the other thing is eloquence, right? And I think this might be the thing that all artists, regardless of discipline, have, is they're able to identify when something effectively communicates an idea, and how precious and how rare that is, and how much I really connect to that. If it's in my own work or in other people's work, just this idea that there's this congruence between an emotion and an expression. Yeah. And that was the question that I was continually exploring in that, how am I going to, draw as powerful a line, maybe not a straight line, but as powerful a line between what these songs are making me feel and how I express them.
When you play your cello, when you tell your stories, when you loop, when you're doing your work from the outside, it looks like you are in the center of the present moment, and that music and self-expression is spooling out of your body. But I'm curious, what does it feel like on the inside, really? What does it, and I know that changes, but what does it feel like on the inside?
It depends on the moment of the song. The moments when I'm most in my brain are when I am laying the loop. So there's some
When you
technical
say in your
things.
brain, you mean like attending to technical?
I'm tending, right? Because I don't use a looper that quantizes, which basically means my time is my own.
This sounds like science.
It is science. So I use a looper.
Meaning it's not on a
it's
strict
not on a grid, right?
Got it.
There's some things that you can record on that will snap whatever you do to the grid.
Got it.
So your time doesn't have to be perfect. So I don't use that kind of a looper simply because the looper I use has really great tonality, really great fidelity, but it just doesn't have a whole lot of bells and whistles.
Got it.
So when I'm laying a loop, like I have to be
You're counting
precise.
it out.
Like I'm some of it is
think I
counting.
felt
I'm
that.
not counting
No,
as much
not-
anymore, but like it is measured.
I think I felt
Yes.
that. I think I felt you feeling that.
Yes. And so there is this massive exhale when I get to the last brick of the layer. And then the next bit is freedom. The next bit is expression. The next bit is say what this moment is, say what this song has been, say what you think maybe this room is feeling. Say what will fit in the time that you have left, right? Because sometimes the constraints are also a very real, honest
Sometimes
part of
you're
the art.
literally watching the countdown
You
clock.
got to. And I've got this really important thing to say, but I've got 45 seconds to say it, right? So, but there is a lot of freedom in responding to those constraints, and that's where it is for me. And so it's usually this, I'm focused, I'm focused, I'm in this very practical execution, and then I've built it, and I get to like live in the house. You know what I mean? So.
I had that sense as you were talking, just that idea that applies to so many things, but building the foundation, taking the time to do that,
Starting with
and then
y-
feeling the
little you,
freedom.
Little you work it, practicing. The 10 million hours of practicing is building the house too.
Yes.
All of that.
All of it. And then right there on stage is building it and freeing
And
it.
so what's interesting, I said honesty and eloquence. Those are two things that I think are important to artists. I'm not sure that the third is important to everybody, but it's been really important to me because, again, I am a fairly composed, mild-mannered, follow the rules kind of guy for the most part. That is not necessarily the experience of freedom.
Yes. Yeah.
And there are these moments when I get to be in those songs
Yeah.
where I am experiencing freedom. And,
Yeah.
and I realize that since the music came into my life in this way, the things that I choose to do recreationally are pursuing that freedom. So I like four things pretty much. I like my cello. I love playing music on my cello. I like canoeing. I like rollerblading, roller skating, and I like dancing. And I like more so being in those
you
spaces.
do contain multitudes.
Yeah, right? So I like being in those spaces as much as I like doing those things. One, especially, I love seeing like rhythm skating in Atlanta. It's a very real thing.
Yeah.
Come from all over the world, like Chicago, New York, Detroit.
Is rhythm
people-
skating like what they would do in Central Park in New York?
It's that kind of thing.
It's
Central
almost
Park in New York,
dancing,
Yes,
but on
dancing,
skates.
but like
Yeah.
it's the
And
movement,
yes.
it's the
Yes.
tricks, and
Yeah.
and I love all that, and I'm okay at it, but I enjoy being
Really?
in that space specifically because people are so free. And the way I describe that freedom is that the distance between the idea and the execution is like nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
Razor's
Like,
edge.
yes.
Razor's
yeah,
edge.
Yes,
boom. It's
right
like I
there.
think and I do, and it's like
That's
boom
right.
right there, right? So I love that. I love that on the dance floor. Specifically, I'm like getting more into like house music and Latin music, and I think there's that same kind of spontaneous creativity that I think is the expression of freedom that I
Yeah.
love, that I absolutely love. And there's something also free about like striking out into the middle of a lake on a canoe. You know what I mean? I like that as well. There's something very, but as a person, I think who I don't feel trapped. That's not the right language, but who is very much invested in being composed and appropriate as is needed by my world and community, by my family, by places where I work, by, I went to all boys schools from 4th grade to 12th grade, and then I went to Morehouse. And didn't grow up with my father in my life initially, but he's in my life now, and we have a very good relationship. But what I will say is that my early ideas of manhood and masculinity were very theoretical. And the first theory for me was like, Knights of the Round Table, like kind of thing like that. But the central idea of that is that a productive, positive man exists for the positive benefit of his community. Right? So there's that, which is cool. Yeah. That's great. But there's a lot of like sublimation and problems with that create that feed toxic masculinity in some ways, right? So what's interesting is that I think freedom needs to be a part of just healthy existence, right? You need to be honest about who you are. You need to be honest about how you feel. You need to be able to express and emote. And all those things are sometimes very antithetical to what it means to be productively masculine, right? And the cello, I think, has really brought that freedom into my life and has brought that awareness into my life and has brought maybe even a certain healthiness into my life in that way.
Isn't that amazing?
So
the
good.
cello.
The cello.
Mm-hmm. The cello is the liberator.
Oh, so much so. In so many ways.
I love that. And I also understand that when you fly, your cello, you buy your cello a ticket and your cello has to have a name because you have to have a name to buy a ticket.
Yeah.
What's your cello's name?
Cello Johnson.
Cello Johnson. There's always room for cello.
There's always room for cello. Right next to me with the seat extender.
With the seat
belt extender. Yeah.
Of course, of course. When you reflect on your personal life thus far, from birth to now, is there a line of demarcation at any point, a moment or an event that you think of your life as before that moment happened or after that happened?
There's two.
Yeah.
And I mentioned both of them. The first was the buddy who was playing Stone Temple Pilots. Julian. And the second, really there's three. There was the world started to change when I met Julian, but it really started to form when I met my wife.
Nice. And what is your wife's name?
My wife's name is Heather.
Hi, Heather.
Hi, Heather.
We are married for 19 years in August.
Congrats.
Yeah. So.
And you met Heather after meeting Julian.
Yeah.
So this is a great series of events.
Yes. Yeah. So a great deal of the form of who I am and the awareness and the consciousness is formed out of just thousands of hours of interaction and conversation with my wife.
Yeah. Good job, Heather.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And then I would say the most recent moment is my 40th birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in a way, probably more acute than those other moments, because those other moments were gradual. They were kind of an unfolding.
Yeah.
Right? I wrote this song and a lot changed on that day. Like I woke up, and this is very interesting. I woke up really miserable.
Yeah.
And the end of that day, I went to bed like, wow, what's happening? I went to bed like, this is interesting. Let me,
You sensed the change.
Sensed it was definitely a precipitous change.
I feel like that is the healing possibility of creativity and self-expression. That you can wake up on your 40th birthday feeling so awesome. And if you put it into self-expression, if you just play around with pouring it into creativity, there is the possibility that it can shepherd you through. Yeah. I love that. Is there a creative thing that you know that you need to do before it's all done?
I don't know if there's a thing. I definitely desire to play regularly, like bigger audiences, to be able to communicate like a full show, this Epiphany show. So I've done 21 of these Epiphany shows since the first time that I did one, and I'm still continuing to do them. And so I really want to take that. That will be what I perform for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So I want to do that forever. But I think somebody that I really admire and a career that I'm I think modeling mine after, not really, but I really like Bobby McFerrin, and not so much.
Yes. I was like, say it.
Yeah.
Say Bobby McFerrin.
I really like Bobby McFerrin. And
Yeah.
a lot of people probably only know the Don't Worry, Be Happy Bobby McFerrin, but the Bobby McFerrin I'm talking about is the person that stands in front of an audience at a TED Talk and walks them through the pentatonic scale and pulls out of them some ancient intuition that they didn't even know existed, that connects us all in the power of music and art, and does that in a way that is so gifted and musical, right?
Yeah.
And then he does something similar with stadiums of people across the world, and it's just him, sitting with a microphone. I think that is one of the most powerful models of like delivery of gift, right? Like it's just, here's what's in me and here's what I'm giving, and I hope it means something to you and it means something to the multitude, right? So I'd love that. That's ultimately where I'd like to find myself at some point.
An image of like literally there's a whole world within us, and we don't, like, all the bells and whistles can go away and we can just share all of that.
You know, it's not exactly this, but I remember seeing a video of Sade perform ages ago, and she has a band, right? But it was the time of like Janet Jackson and of like big spectacle.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
20 dancers,
Rhythm
Nation, and all this stuff.
Yeah,
and I remember that. Literally, we hardly saw the band, and the camera just had Sade in, and like she was just this, like, not even a full two-step, but just back and forth.
She's a smooth operator.
And what she right? And what she was sharing was so profoundly captivating, right?
Yeah.
Now that I use that as like a pop culture accessible reference, but I think my idea is that, like, I think there's definitely space for spectacle. And I think I really love the artists who are able to do that. I love the Beyoncés, but I just know that's not my particular gift.
Yeah.
I think I am, even though my show has dynamics, I'm a thoughtful, contemplative communicator. Even if I'm screaming on my cello. And there are moments when my show contains a scream. And there are moments when my show contains like, an exclamation, right? But even in those spaces, there's this, I hope, like this contemplative opportunity to like be enlightened or to connect or to be moved or to like walk out of the space and desire to move. And that happens when I see Bobby McFerrin in a stadium of 20,000 people.
Yeah.
That precious, almost quiet moment of exchange is still there.
Yeah. I feel like this vision that you're that you're weaving, I'm feeling this for you.
Thank you.
I am
got this.
I am feeling this for you.
Thank you.
You've got this.
I feel like your life, all of your life experience and all of you are moving towards this so clearly.
I'm hoping. I just wrote a song called Beacon. And I won't go into the long explanation, but the idea is that the song itself is a love letter to the future self you want to be. And that the way that you have connected to that future self is when that future self remembers you in this moment. Right? And
My jaw just dropped right off my face. So now I'm buttless and jawless.
You really can't lose any more body parts. Please.
You've really done a number here. I'm going to have to carry her.
The song and the emotion behind it becomes this beacon, this like flash that travels throughout the ether, throughout dimension to connect to the you are becoming.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
can you tell us this? What's it all for?
What's it all for? Oh, wow. I didn't know I was going to tell this part. I don't know what's it all for everybody. I can
but
tell
for you,
from me.
for you.
I've had a fairly odd life, fairly charmed and blessed life. And it started with a really different moment. I was 4, it was like 1979, and my family's Catholic. And Pope John Paul was traveling the world, and he made a stop in D.C. And my mom was going to take me to go see Pope John Paul. I'm helping her. Well, I'm getting ready. She's getting ready. I'm in her dressing room. In her jewelry box, and there's this gold cross. And it's a gold cross with 7 rhinestones. 2 of them are missing. And I pick it up and I ask her, "Hey, Mom, can I give this to the Pope?" And my mom's an educator and very nurturing and loves kids, and so she's very gentle in the way that she deals with this. "Well, sure, you can give it to the Pope. You can take it with you. But if you are unable to give it to the Pope, I don't want you to be too sad because there are going to be a lot of people there." Right? So she's kind of managing my expectations. I'm like, "Okay, well, that'll be great, but I'm going to give it to the Pope. Don't worry, Mom." So we go to the shrine. I think it's the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, but it's the big shrine on Catholic University's campus in Washington, D.C. the cement barricades going down these tiers of stairs, these like cascading tiers of stairs, big, massive cathedral doors pop open, Pope appears, he starts walking down. We're like midway down these cascading tiers of stairs. By the time I can kind of see him from the distance, I'm like, Mom, pass me up. And she's like, we're like 7 people rows back. Like, I can't do that. I don't know these people. I can't. And this guy in front of her hears. Yeah. I know. It's someone else. This guy hears me. And he's like, does he need to see the Pope? I'll pass him up. He grabs me from my mom, passes me to the front of the barricade. Someone's holding my waist. And the Pope walks by and I yell, Pope, Pope. And the rest is what I have been told. I don't know that I remember verbatim, but he walks over and he picks me up. I'm holding the cross. I give him the cross. He takes the cross with his hand and he looks at it and he gives it back to me. He blesses me with his right hand, reaches into the vestments, the pockets of his vestments, and pulls out a plastic case and gives it to me, and then passes me back to where I came from. And then they start passing me back to my mom, and everyone's kind of crowding around like, oh my God, what did he give you? What did he give you? Is it a toy? Is it candy? And it was his papal rosary with his insignia on it. And was a really weird way to begin your consciousness as a kid. And there's so many strange things that are, not light, very real about growing up in Washington, D.C. as a young Black boy in the 80s and the early 90s. And those perils were real for me and for my family. Mm-hmm. They still are real for many, many, many Black men across the country. But they never really impacted my life. And the exact opposite happened. So I belonged to a family that played ice hockey. So I started playing ice hockey at 4, and then I started playing cello at 7, and I went to a prep school at 9. And the narrative from that moment forward is an odd one. Like, there are just lots of things where you're like, Black boy, DC, 1986, that's what's going on for you? Mm-hmm. But it is. Wow. And I was acutely aware of the idea that to whom much is given, much is expected. Have always been. But always wanted to give an authentic gift. And somehow the gift at the time seemed to go and make a lot of money and come home and give it to the community, wear the blue suit, go to church on Sunday, and that kind of thing like that, right? And that just was never really what I just didn't feel like it was my thing. Mm-hmm. What has felt like my thing is communicating. What has felt like my thing or my gift is creating, sharing maybe, and then creating sacred experiences for people, transformative experiences for people. And what has felt like my why is to harness the strange and unique story that has been my life into something that is of value for people who might be interested in engaging it. So that's for me, the why.
That's a pretty good why.
Yeah.
Camian's weeping. My head fell off my shoulders. This is my disembodied head
over there.
Finally, what or who is sparking you these days? You're sparking us, but who's sparking you?
Yeah.
There's a lot. My family, my wife, and
Heather.
Yeah, Heather. And the truth of the matter is I got to be real because I'll get in trouble with my wife if I continually paint life and relationships and marriage as this like rosy phenomenon that like we're just skipping through fields. The last year or so has been a complicated one, right? And I think one that we are actively working well through. But I am amazingly certain that it is her presence and her force and her love and her energy for the last 20 years that has created the circumstances for both of us even to really ask these questions about who we are and what we're trying to do.
Right. I love that you're that real.
And
I love that.
So that's very, that's a spark.
Yeah.
The thing that actually is driving me right now is that I talk a lot. You guys perhaps have noticed that.
Love it.
I like talking. I feel in control.
Yeah.
When I'm talking.
Yeah.
There's a lot of order that I've made in my life out of this control that I'm not so sure serves me all that well as an artist.
Back to the beginning.
And the cello challenges that control, that comfort, that composure.
Yeah.
And it's thrusting me face to face in some instances with emotions and experiences and
Shirts with wet
expressions,
collars.
shirts with wet collars that I don't generally engage when I'm speaking. So it is
It's
both
like
the pursuit and the experience.
Yeah.
There's
of that
something
reality.
about what you're describing. Sometimes I think it can be achieved with music. Sometimes I think it can be achieved with scent. And sometimes I think it can be achieved with cellos, where it's past language. It cuts straight from your heart to my heart and your audience's heart.
Yes. Our hearts.
Oh, God.
Thank you
Corey.
so much.
Oh, wow. Thank you for having me.
Here.
This was a joy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
I
much
hope
for
that there was
being
enough
here.
shenanigan in it. Was there enough shenanigan
Yes.
in it?
I feel shenanigans
I feel
satisfied.
totally. I mean, her head fell off, her butt fell off. We have shenanigans.
We have shenanigans.
Yeah,
Tammy
yeah,
cried
yeah.
hot tears.
This is how it goes.
This is how it goes.
Gotcha.
That was amazing.
We're
Thank you.
thankful and grateful that you made this time to sit down with
No
us.
problem. What an honor.
You are a walking, talking, looping, cello playing spark.
Oh, wow.
You
Thank
really are.
Friends at home, we
All of
hope
that,
that this
all
put
your stories.
another bunch of sparks in your spark file. If there is a spark you would like us to explore, or if you've taken a spark and you've fanned it into a creative flame and you'd like to share that with us, please won't you email us at thesparkfile@gmail.com or submit it through our website. That's right, we've got a website because we're fancy. Thesparkfile.com.
We'll even take your feedback, but you know the price of admission. First, you got to share a creative risk that you've taken recently.
And be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, rate, 5-star review it. If you love this podcast, won't you share it with other people that you love? If you didn't like it, I hope that you take all of those feelings and you weave them into a thrash metal song, because at least that way you'll have gotten something out of this experience.
Nice.
If something tickles your fancy and gets your creative juices flowing, we're writing you a forever permission slip to make that thing that's been knocking at your door. It's your turn to take a spark and fan it into a flame.
You got to hum it. You got to strum it. You got to join a marching band and big bass drum it.
You got to take it and make it. Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for having me.
We love you. We love you very much.
Oh, love y'all.
Bye, Heather. We love you too.
When I bump into something that inspires me, I dump it in my spark file. Could be something that I wanna make or how I wanna be. I pump it in my spark file. I jump into my spark file. Let's open up the spark file.
Hi, friends. Susan Blackwell from the Spark File here to let you know that the doors are open for the Spark File Illume, a 9-month group creativity coaching mastermind that invites you to be the chief creative officer and chief marketing officer of your creativity. But what does that mean? That means in 9 months in Illume, you will clarify and advance your big creative goals and learn how to effectively share your work with the world. Now, if you're listening to this and you're an experienced creative or an accomplished professional who seeks a space where it is safe to attempt something you've never tried before, or complete a big creative project, or take your work to the next level and acquire the skills needed to share your creative work with the world, Illume might be right for you. We are calling in emotionally intelligent, high-functioning creatives who are ready to level up. You can find out more by going to thesparkfile.com/Illume, but do it now to find out if Illume is right for you and to save with early bird discounts. That's thesparkfile.com/Illume. Take a leap, take a risk, go to thesparkfile.com/Illume and join us for Illume.